Thornicorft, Kenneth, who's going to tell us all about NCAA rules and the changes and what we might expect from them. Wait for the signal from John to make sure.
Want me to hold the mic?
Yeah. That's good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You may be familiar with the fact that there's quite a sea change going on with the National Collegiate Athletic Association eligibility rules. I'll just refer to that as the NCAA. So my presentation is going to be rather speculative because we don't know what the landscape is going to look like because these rules won't come into effect until this coming season in the fall. And it may be a few years after that before we really see what's going on. So this is sort of a good thing for an academic because I can say whatever I want. No one can really prove that I'm wrong at this point in time, although history may judge me to be a poor prognosticator. I also want to apologize because I'm going to talk about some background information separate and apart from the NCAA rule changes, but I think you need to appreciate this information in order to possibly understand how these rule changes might take effect. And I also want to apologize because if you ever look at the CBA in the National Hockey League, it's 700 pages and a number of 200 or 300 pages of schedules. Trying to reduce that into a bullet point is highly problematic. So someone might leap up and say, well, that's not right because clause 76A, says something else. And you're probably right, but I'm just sort of talking at sort of a very high level. And a lot of this is very familiar to people in the room, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But the draft is 7 rounds, as you know, and the players are drafted between the ages of 18 and 22, and there are some limitations in terms of players aged 21 and 22. One interesting thing, though, in regard to what might be happening in the future is if you're drafted out of major junior, the team that drafts you has a reserve right to your services to sign you to a contract for 2 seasons, whereas if you come out of the NCAA, they hold that reserve right until your graduating class actually graduates, which could be as long as 4 years. I have been talking to people in the hockey world, and there is some suggestion that teams might be encouraging players to, when they have an opportunity to encourage them, to move to the NCAA route because selfishly that gives them more time to evaluate the player and before they have to actually sign them to a contract. I'll maybe just skip ahead. So mainly these rules are designed to deal with major junior, and I'm sure you all know how major junior works. There's 3 leagues. They compete for the Memorial Cup. Players are drafted into the league as bantam age players, and there's geographical rules about where a player can play. There are some legal questions that are now being raised about whether that is an anti-competitive process and whether or not that draft can stand in the future is maybe somewhat of an open question. But essentially the players, and this has always been the position of the NCAA, they receive a very modest weekly stipend, which is sort of one thing. But the other thing is within major junior, there could be at any given time a reasonable number of players that have already signed an entry-level contract, may have already played in the NHL, and certainly may have received compensation. So on that basis, the NCAA always treated the players, not just those that had signed entry-level contracts, but all players in major junior as professionals. And as such, they were ineligible to play in the NCAA. Still, we see a lot of players drafted out of the major junior. I'll give you some stats in a moment. But also there are junior A leagues, both in Canada and the United States. And perhaps the most interesting of the junior A leagues is the British Columbia Hockey League, because it was historically a junior A league just in British Columbia, although it now has franchises in Alberta as well. You may know that just this past season. 5 or 6 teams from the Alberta Junior League joined the BCHL. The BCHL about 2 years ago broke away from Hockey Canada and became sort of a rogue league, at least insofar as Hockey Canada is concerned. And they had the reasons for doing that. But the British Columbia Hockey League, its sort of value proposition always was, well, we're not a professional league insofar as the NCAA is concerned. So players from all over Canada, all over the United States, and even including Europe, could come to the British Columbia Hockey League, play, and then they would not lose their eligibility for NCAA scholarships. And in fact, the British Columbia Hockey League has been historically very successful in graduating players from their league into the NCAA. It's going to be very interesting to see how the ramifications of that for that league. There's also college hockey in Canada, U Sports, 35 teams, but they tend to be, if you look at the rosters, they tend to be graduated major junior players. A very large percentage of the rosters for many of the U Sports teams are from that. So they're usually not draft eligible. As you can see here, the average age is 23. And if you look at the rosters, you can only join university when you're 18 or 19 typically. I think one of the sort of unheralded facts about U Sports hockey is the very, very high quality of the hockey. It's probably better than major junior, accepting that you don't have the sort of the star players that you see in major junior. But I always find it interesting when the World Juniors are preparing, they play a U Sports team, and they almost always lose, right? And there's no secret as to why that happens. They're men, and as opposed to kids who could be 16, 17, 18 playing. And then there's the NCAA. So these rule changes only affect what's known as Division I. So NCAA sports are divided between Division I, Division II, Division III. Division I is sort of the big dog. When I was in the United States going to university, I was at a Div 3 school, and I was running on the cross-country team as a 35-year-old PhD student. It was kind of fun, but it's the absolute level of amateurism, so to speak. But if you're talking about Division I sports, especially sports like football and basketball, we're talking about teams that generate hundreds of millions of dollars and have television contracts that football teams fill 100,000 seat stadiums, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a very big deal. NCAA Division I hockey is a very high level of hockey, and I think that's reflected in the fact when we look at drafting. So this and the time here, the draft, as you know, is 7 rounds, but I've only recorded 4 rounds here, and the reason for that is this is a very interesting paper that came out a little while ago. If anybody wants the site, I can give it to you. But the authors looked at the draft from 1963 to 2023, and they broke it down by how many players in each round play 1 game, whatever, and so it goes. So I selected, just for purposes of analysis, players that had played at least 100 NHL games, which is essentially a full NHL season plus. Of course, for many of these players, it might have been over 6 or 7 seasons as they were called up. But over that period of time, in the first round, 70.2% of the drafted players played at least 100 games. Round 2, it dropped substantially to 39.9%. Round 3, 28.2%. Round 4, 21.8%. And then it really drops off rounds 5, 6, and 7. It's about 15% for the next 2 rounds, and then the 7th round, about 11%. So, if you have a higher probability of playing into the NHL, you're probably going to have to be selected in one of the first 4 rounds. And as you can see here, the text is a little small here, but in 2021 to 2024, what I've done here is these columns don't reflect where the player was drafted from. They reflect where the player played the next season, because oftentimes the team drafting the player has a lot to say about where that player is going to go. So, for example, a lot of European players are drafted out of European League, but then they move to major junior hockey for the next season. So, bearing in mind that is what this statistic refers to, is the year one post draft. So about 45, almost 46% of the players drafted in the first 4 rounds, they played in the CHL the next season. From the NCAA, it was a little over a quarter, 26.8%, and then from everywhere else, so these would be the European leagues and so forth, another 27.9%. No, this excludes the NHL. Yeah, this excludes the NHL. So other could be in that category, right? But that would be a very small number of players. Yeah. This may also be very, very relevant when we're looking at how the NCAA rule changes are going to be affecting players. So if you are drafted out of major junior, you are going to be signing, if you sign at all, an entry-level contract that will be for a 3-year term. That's, there are some exceptions, but typically that's the way that's going to work. The maximum salary that a player can be paid for 2025 draft year players is $975,000 per year in the NHL, but $85,000 in the AHL. However, and I'll get to this in a moment, the National Hockey League has an agreement with Major Junior Hockey called the NHL-CHL Transfer Agreement. They guard that agreement like Fort Knox. I've never seen a copy of it. It's not publicly available. But my understanding of how it works, I think, is fairly sound. If you are an 18 or 19-year-old player and you are drafted and you sign an entry-level contract, you can only play in the NHL or in major junior. And again, that's a very interesting question because that is a barrier to labor mobility, which could be an anti-competitive practice, but it's embedded in this particular agreement. The other thing that this agreement provides for is compensation to the major junior teams when a player signs an ELC. So the most recent agreement that I was able to get my hands on expired in 2021, but that agreement has been renewed apparently till 2029, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the NHL sort of kicks back money to these players, or to the major junior. They don't have an agreement with the NCAA, they don't have an agreement with junior A leagues, they don't have an agreement with European leagues. And so clearly the NHL at least looks upon major junior as its principal development league, and the numbers sort of bear that out. So if you do sign an NHL contract and you do play in the NHL out of major junior, you're earning basically $1 million a year, but you can also get bonuses, and these bonuses are uniquely available to players coming out of the draft on their ELCs. So you can get a signing bonus of up to 10% of your guaranteed money. So your guaranteed money is your salary and then a bonus. So a player returned to junior, if they're a high-end player, they probably have a $97,500 US check in their hands, and that signing bonus would be for each of the 3 years. So year 1, year 2, year 3. So whatever that is, 180,000, almost 300,000 over the 3-year term. But they're also eligible for bonuses. So there's 2 levels of bonuses provided for in the collective agreement: A-level bonuses, and they're capped at $1 million. And then there's B-level bonuses, which are basically league awards. So looking at someone like Connor Bedard, for example, when his first year in the NHL, he earned about $2 million, even though his his contract was fixed at $975. He would have got he would have got his signing bonus, which he did get. And then his contract, as I understand it, he had to hit 4 of these targets in order to reach his bonus, and he did. It was like games played, points per game, goals and assists, and there was minimum levels that you had to achieve. So a top-end player can still earn a pretty substantial amount of money, but of course that's only going to be the top-end player. We're really talking about a very small number of players. So let me move forward and talk about the rule changes. So as I said before, there's a very serious question legally about whether or not the way the NHL-CHL transfer agreement works, the way the major junior draft works, does this create anti-competitive barriers to labor mobility? So a fellow named Masterson, I think his name was Brent, he played as a 16-year-old 2 preseason games. So he never even played in the regular season. He played two preseason games with the OHL's Windsor Spitfires, and as a result of that, he was declared ineligible to play NCAA hockey. So if you can't make it into major junior, junior A, or wherever else you might be able to play. So he filed a lawsuit under the U.S. equivalent of the Competition Act in Canada called the Sherman Antitrust. And the Sherman Antitrust Act is very interesting because if you succeed, the court will award you 3 times. It's called the treble damages rule. You will receive 3 times your compensatory damages. So just to look at how this might all play out. So Boston College is one of the sort of the elite NCAA teams. If you get a scholarship to go to Boston College, that's worth close to $100,000 US or $90,000 US per season. That's what the scholarship value is. So if you are denied entry into the NCAA because of an anti-competitive rule that's struck down, you could say, well, I was denied the value of this scholarship that I probably would have earned. And remember, we're talking about civil liability, not criminal liability. So you don't have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, like whether somebody committed a crime. You only have to prove something is more probable than not. So someone like Masterson or other players, if they could demonstrate through their statistical profile that I probably would have got a scholarship to one of these 64 NCAA teams, I don't know if that would be that hard to demonstrate for a lot of higher end talent players. Well, then I was denied for a 4-year term a educational package that was worth close to 100,000 US. So that's 400,000. Let's triple that. And so as you can imagine, the NCAA was just absolutely, I don't know what the word is. I would say very upset about this whole thing. So that was filed in, I think it's interesting how this worked. That was filed on August 12th, 2024. The NCAA met in November 2024 and put into effect a new rule. And I suspect that was largely driven by their fear of what their liability might be under this class action lawsuit. So you can see the rule changes, they're struck out. So the previous rule was if you if you were playing and you were on a professional team, so you can see here major junior is considered to be a professional team, then you would be ruled to be ineligible. So now if you play in major junior and all you receive is actual and necessary expenses, so I've emphasized this particular point. So the $600 or so $100 stipend per month that the players receive is almost certainly going to be characterized as just an offset against reasonable expenses, food and transportation and those sorts of things. Now, of course, if you sign a professional contract, you're still ineligible. or if you play, in a professional league. But they're no longer considering major junior to be a professional league. So that rule will take effect August 1st, 2025. So it's not even in effect yet, but it will be for this coming season. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is something called NIL, name, image, and likeness. And again, this rule change also came out of a class action lawsuit. So NCAA players were not allowed to trade on their, quote, brand, right? So, as you can imagine, some of these college players in some sports, particularly basketball, football, maybe track and field, but surprisingly, some women in like gymnastics or Olympic champions and those sorts of things, there's a great deal of brand value, and they were not allowed to trade on that. So lawsuits were filed, and eventually the matter went up to the United States Supreme Court twice. And most recently, the United States Supreme Court said the NCAA rules that basically prohibited athletes trading on their brand image were unlawful. And so now there are what are called NIL rules. And it's remarkable how much money is now changing hands in this new NIL environment. There's the top 100 players in the NCAA, mostly football and basketball players, but also some gymnasts and tennis players, and they're earning over $1 million a year in NIL money. And not only that, but apart from NIL money being made available to an individual player, NIL money can be available to a team, and then the team can use that fund to attract high-end players. So Michael Misa, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he is reputed to be one of the top, say, 1 to 5 in most rankings for the upcoming draft. Apparently, and this has not been formally announced, but apparently he has an agreement to join Boston College for next season, and he is going to receive $1.4 million to do that. So that's more than the league minimum in the NHL. It's less than he might earn based on his bonuses, but you're a top-end player, means you're usually going to not a terribly good NHL team. It becomes more difficult to hit those bonus targets, and so and recently you may have heard of Gavin McKenna. He's 1 year away from the draft. Apparently a deal is brewing for him to join the NCAA for next year. And apart from the NIL money, the argument also is, well, you're playing against men. You've done everything you can do in the CHL. I think he won the scoring championship or is about to win the scoring championship this season. He maybe has proven himself at that level of competition. I guess we can debate whether top-end NCAA is equivalent to top-end major junior, but you are playing against men, and it is a tougher game. The other thing is major junior plays a 68-game season. College hockey is quite a bit shorter than that. I think I wrote it down on my slide somewhere. 45 games. I think in the youth sports, it's 30 games. But a lot of practice time. So typically the games are on the weekend, and most NCAA programs have at least 3 and sometimes 4 practices. They provide all the equipment. The coaching is very high level. The resources that are made available often far surpass what major junior teams can provide. I mean, if you go to these high-end universities and you look at their athletic facilities, it's jaw-dropping. I mean, their rinks, their training rooms, their accommodations, they fly, and in major junior, you're not allowed to fly. Teams have to bus it. These teams fly. And, just the level of professionalism at some of these programs is really off the charts. And when you look at the money that's available in the NCAA at some of these top schools, I mean, these schools have literally billions of dollars in their kind of endowment funds that are available for a wide variety of purposes, but including athletics. So when you put that all together, it's going to be a very interesting question about how this is all going to fall out. So my predictions, and we can debate these. But I think perhaps the biggest loser of all might be the BC Hockey League. They've already lost 2 franchises right off the get-go, and they have lost something like 60 players already that have left to either to go to Major Junior, because they can, generally speaking, I think Major Junior is considered to be a higher level of competition than the British Columbia Hockey League. So you can jump to the Western Hockey League or the OHL, play a season, and then move to your college team, not forfeit your scholarship. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the BCHL is going to sort itself out. The Penticton Vs have already left, and they were always the signature franchise in that particular league. My understanding is, and this is not a matter of public record, but my understanding is that the Penticton Vs paid $15 million to join the WHL and paid another $5 million as a kind of a territorial offset against whatever the closest team is. Is it Kelowna Rockets, I imagine? I don't have confirmation of those numbers, but I've got that number from 2 sources that are relatively close to the scene, so I'm sure it'll never be published. So, what is going to happen to the BCHL? I think maybe we might see some of the more talented players who were looking to go to U.S. colleges, who are 16 and 17, not eligible yet to play in the NCAA, may go to the Major Junior. So that might age down Major Junior. And the older players who are at least eligible for college now might move to the NCAA. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. The Canadian Hockey League, it's hard to know whether or not this is going to be a win or a loss. Some people have suggested to me that what the Canadian Hockey League might do is they might further expand into the United States, picking off USHL franchises. So the USHL is kind of junior A hockey. Apparently 2 teams have already been in negotiation with the Ontario Hockey League to join that league. The USHL threatened to sue them if they left, and so there may be litigation around that. But the CHL might expand into the United States. They already have, maybe 6 or 7 teams in the United States in that ballpark, which could be, they might be moving into USHL markets, which could be a bad thing for the USHL. Could be a good thing for the CHL, selling off franchises at $15 million a pop, which wouldn't be so bad. I wonder about the NCAA. To me, this seems to me that this is just win-win-win for the NCAA. They've got a much bigger pool of players. They're now, because of the nil money, much better positioned to really pick off the star players. The star players may wish to go to the NCAA because $600 a month or $1.4 million in nil money. Boy, that's a tough decision. And I play fewer games. I get more practices. I'm playing against bigger, stronger players. I'm in larger markets often. Not to say anything against Prince Albert or whatever, but, compared to Boston or Denver or, whatever. So it seems to me that could be a really big win for the NCAA. And I just wonder about U Sports. It's going to be tough for U Sports, I think. If you're a graduating player from Major Junior and you can go play U Sports, or you could go to the NCAA. A lot of U Sports teams, they don't provide a lot of financial support for their players. They typically provide equipment, and maybe a very modest bursary of some description. But if you can get a full ride scholarship to go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Denver University, Cornell, the value of that scholarship over the course of time is extraordinary, right? So we'll see how U Sports fares with that. So That's where we are. We, in time, we'll know, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if I can. Um,
So
this
if you
point.
guys, so one thing was, there's a couple comments from Zoom. One is you also get your education, as you're pointing out, with the AHL. The other is that the AHL, or not the NHL, but with the NCAA, no
Right.
money. The other one is AHL may also lose out as well because they're roughly in the same age brackets in many cases. Um, and it's easier, right? The more money you're getting out of the NCAA,
Mhm.
unless you're one of those players on an NHL contract that is
Right.
there. But one thing I would like to point out with the NCAA no money has been the transfer portal. And we talked about this at the St. Andrews meeting a little bit with one of the coaches there, right? About like when you're looking at the football league, they can now just submit their name. If they don't like the coach, they don't like the thing program there at the college, they can submit their name into the transfer portal and then move to where they want to. And that has actually been very disruptive to football programs, even some of the longstanding ones. So it's no
Mhm.
longer you're going to be tied for 4 years to that college. And the transfer portal has made it almost seamless that you could transfer almost mid-season now.
And that to me is just yet another advantage for the NCAA, because think about Major Junior. You were drafted and that team owns your rights and they can trade you. If you sign an NCAA scholarship, you know that you're going to be spending the next 4 years in Boston. If you want to, if it doesn't work out and you want to leave, fine, but you've got that. So, you know, you're drafted, you play for Victoria Royals. It's a great arena and a really good organization, whatever. And in your second year, you're traded to wherever, right? Prince George. Poor Prince George. They try so hard.
It's no Prince Albert.
Yeah. So, you know, again, that to me is just yet another arrow in the quiver of the NCAA relative to other development programs that players might follow.
I had a question just about that Masterson case, which seemed to trigger the change, but then the change doesn't come through till this year. What's the
Yes.
status of that case?
The case is pending. It hasn't been certified as a class action. Of course, players who were ruled ineligible and lost scholarship opportunities up until that time, their claims are still standing, right? The class, I think, was defined as in from 2020. So the NCAA could still be in for a big judgment being held against it, as it was in the NIL. The final judgment in the NIL litigation, there was one large class action. My recollection was that it was $500 million in damages that the NCAA had to pay out in the NIL litigation. Now, let's not have giant tears for the NCAA. It is one of the wealthiest organizations in the world. I mean, if you look at their television contract, like March Madness is now on, that's $1 billion television contract, right? I mean, it's their revenue streams are extraordinary, but you know, their risk is also very high in regard to this. Yeah.
One comment and one question. First, on the class action suit, it's a little easier to be part of a class when you just say, I bought bread at Loblaws versus establishing I had the ability to get an
Yes.
NCAA scholarship.
Yes.
So I think that's going to be some of the resistance to certifying it as a class action. And then my question is, my understanding is that Canadians had great difficulty getting NIL money, Zach Edey especially, because of the visa issues,
Right.
and that they weren't allowed to work, which is
Yeah.
there. So
Tho-
how is that
Those
playing out?
issues are still being worked
So,
out.
and
Yeah.
made it a little more complicated in today's climate of whatever it is.
Yeah. Point well taken. You know, although apparently checks are being written, so I don't really know. You know, right first. Yeah, and we'll litigate it later. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Go there yet.
that was my question as well. All these Canadian contracts going into the US, will they be subject to tariffs?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Okay, I was wondering, was this, how does this relate to the rule change like in the early 70s? Isn't that the last time the NCAA made a change like this?
You've got me there. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so.
I'm sort of at the end of my time, so how many more questions do you want to take?
Yes, a few more questions.
Okay.
Is a few just for me. Is that just because somebody gets a scholarship doesn't guarantee them the ability to play. Let's say you give money to a major junior player to come play at Boston College. That's fine. He's good for 1 year. All of a sudden, the crop of major juniors coming in the next year are even better than him. So they come in, he comes out, he might have a scholarship, fine, go to school, have classes, but it doesn't guarantee that you play hockey.
Absolutely fair comment. The only thing I would say is that's equally true with major junior. A lot of players are on the roster at the start of the season, and players lose their roster spot, and then they're scrambling around to find a junior A team or very rarely even a junior B team to pick them up so that they can finish out the season. So point very well taken, but I think it applies, on both sides of the border. So
Glenn has another question, but we're gonna have to do it after because we want to keep on schedule, make sure we're at the lunch. Thanks a lot. Next, Don Murray.
Yeah, we're going to change pace quite a bit. The last time I spoke at one of these meetings was in October of 2023 in Halifax, and I followed Ken at that time, and now I'm getting the opportunity to do that again. And it was, again, a great difference between what's happening in the 2020s to what was happening